Today I'm going to talk about some quick tips on how to spot a fake gemstone. In my tools for identifying gemstones video, I have lots of different methods that I talk about how gemologists professionally go about identifying various gemstones as well as separating them from fakes and synthetics. But today I wanted to go over some quick things that as a gemologist I would be thinking about if I was out and about looking at jewelry in different stores and trying to identify in my mind what these gems are and if they are synthetic or even imitation. This is if I just had no tools with me whatsoever and I'm just using my eye and common sense. The first thing you need to distinguish is the difference between imitation gems and synthetics. Imitation is any material that is being used to imitate another gemstone. So obviously the most popular are plastic and glass, but it could also be something like dyed quartz. Quartz is a very inexpensive gem material that is often dyed to imitate gems that are more expensive, such as ruby or emerald. You also have things like green chalcedony and other kind of cheaper stones that again are being used to imitate things that are much more expensive and rare. So when I pick up a piece of jewelry, let's say in a gift shop while traveling, for example, and I'm trying to figure out what really the gemstone is. The first thing to tell with glass or plastic is that it's not a gem material. It's not an actual mineral or stone which has hardness. Glass or plastic is always going to have that kind of softer molded look to it. And yes, even though we think of glass as being shiny and hard and kind of breakable, and if you break it, it has those sharp edges, it still has a much softer appearance to most gem materials on the market. So the first place we're going to look for this is actually the facet junctions. So when we think of a cut gemstone, anytime that the surface of the gem changes, you have the point where the two surfaces meet, and that's a facet junction. On gem material, it's always going to have a very sharp, crisp appearance. Whereas glass or plastic, again, even though we think of glass as having that kind of hard effect, it's always poured into a mold to get the shape of a gemstone. It's rarely cut. Sometimes glass is, but it's mostly poured into molds. So when we see those facet junctions, they have a much more rounded appearance. So when we look up close, first appearance, it could look as a gemstone, but when we look up close, those facet junctions are a lot kind of softer, rounded, molded looking. You might also notice some other mold lines, especially if these plastic or glass gems that you're looking at aren't even set in jewelry. If you look closely, you might see faint lines on there from the molds that they were pushed into. Similar to a pressed glass goblet, you kind of get that glass line going down the edge from where it was pushed right into the mold. The other thing you'll notice with glass and plastic gemstones, especially glass, is you are going to get gas bubbles. Glass is also much lower on the Mohs hardness scale than most gemstones. It sits around a 6 to a 6.5, which means it can be scratched very easily, even by gems like quartz. So if you have a glass gem that's kind of been kicking around for a while in a piece of jewelry, it's likely to have a lot of abrasions, a lot of those facet abrasions, and just have a surface that looks pretty scratched up and damaged. Of course, when you're looking at pieces that are not as high-end, cheap glass and plastic jewels are often set in settings that are just as cheap as they are. So you're gonna look settings with prongs and things like that, even the way that the closures are done on the pieces of jewelry. And they're gonna be a lot cheaper, maybe even plastic or base metal themselves, and that's gonna be a big tip off that the gems themselves are probably not authentic. When we refer to synthetic gemstones, we're talking about gemstones that actually have the same chemical composition and structure as a natural gemstone. So obviously this has become synonymous with lab stones because lab diamonds have become so popular. At one time they were referred to as synthetic diamonds, but now because of the marketing and all the industry behind it, we do call them lab diamonds. And with their popularity, we are starting to see a lot more colored gems, which are a lot more rare than diamonds, also be synthesized. And so we're seeing lab rubies, lab emeralds, because they have become very rare and expensive naturally. Lab stones, especially with colored gems, are not a new invention. We've seen synthetic rubies, synthetic emeralds, all the way past through the Art Deco period set in jewelry. So if you're looking at antique pieces, just keep in mind this is still a possibility. As a gemologist, one of the biggest tells if I'm looking at a synthetic emerald, ruby, or sapphire is that it looks just too good to be true. It looks really, really perfect as far as its color. It has a super bright, saturated color, which at this point is extremely rare for the big three. and it has a very uniform color all over, which again is not really something we see very much with natural gemstones. With emeralds and sapphires in particular, it's not uncommon to get a lot of color zoning. They might look lighter or darker in some areas. So if you're looking at a stone and it just has, again, that very saturated, bright, beautiful color, it's super even all over the stone, you have to think, is this too good to be true? And of course, one of the biggest tells of that is going to be the price point. When it comes to the price point and deciding whether a gemstone is synthetic or natural, you have to think about that the people who are selling very high value natural gemstones know that they are very rare and very highly sought after, and so they want to get as much money for them as possible. In order to do that, they almost always are going to bring these gemstones to market in a luxury environment. So they're going to likely sell them through very luxurious jewelers, which are located in high-end shopping malls. They're going to use luxury gem dealers, designers, and even auction level in order to get the biggest bang for their buck for these very rare gems. So if you just happen to come across a colored gemstone that is super high quality with a very good price, of course you need to ask yourself where you are. Are you in a very touristy area while traveling? Are you on a cruise ship? Are you in a jewelry store in a not high-end area? Are you dealing with a jeweler that just has a few gemstones that the other ones also don't seem to be very high quality? He just happens to have this very special stone. Of course, there are always going to be exceptions to the rule, but these are the common sense things that I would be thinking about. Always ask yourself, does the price and the quality that I'm getting match the environment that I'm in? So the other thing I want to cover off is that yes, some color is obviously too good to be true, but one of the ways you can tell that is if the color of the gem lacks dimension and richness. You have to keep in mind that a natural gemstone has been formed in the earth over millions to even billions of years versus a synthetic stone that has been formed sometimes only in a matter of weeks in a laboratory. Obviously, the one that's been formed on earth has encountered so many different kind of environmental issues. It's come into contact with different elements, trace elements. Sometimes they've come and gone, sometimes they've been in different amounts. And of course, having even just a small amount of inclusions is totally normal and even a very high quality gemstone. So obviously when you're looking at the synthetic stone, yes, that perfection is really going to come into play. If there's absolutely zero inclusions whatsoever, and again, no dimension or depth of quality to the color of that stone. And when I talk about the depth of color, something that really helps is thinking about dyed hair color, for example. When you look at someone who has colored hair, it has kind of a flatness to it. It doesn't have that natural dimension. And that's because every single hair on their head is exactly the same color, which is very unnatural looking to our eye. If you look at someone who has natural hair color, it has all this natural dimension to it, where there's natural lightness and darkness from being exposed to the sun. And the same is with gemstones. As I said, once they've grown in the earth, you kind of look at it, it is a mineral crystal. It reflects light, it has all this dimension, it has scintillation, it feels very natural, looking at all those different colors and kind of lightness and darkness. Versus a synthetic stone, which has that kind of flat color to it. There's not a lot of depth or dimension there. There's something kind of flat and too uniform about it. And this is something that also comes into play with color treatment, for example. So it could be a natural stone, it could be a synthetic stone that has been irradiated for color treatment. And a great example of this is topaz. A lot of topaz is irradiated to be blue or pink. And pink topaz is a great example. A lot of the times when you see them in a mass market jewelry store, they have that very vibrant kind of saturated hot pink color. It looks a little unnatural to our eye. We kind of look at it and we're like, wow, I've never seen anything like that in nature before, or very rarely. You also get this with dyed gemstones. So for example, I mentioned quartz earlier, and quartz is a stone that can also be dyed to mimic other more expensive gemstones. So you might have a colorless quartz that ends up red or green or royal blue. The last thing I'll mention about thinking about color when it comes to spotting synthetic gemstones is that a synthetic gem isn't going to have any windowing or extinction. Windowing is when a colored gemstone is cut very flat, and so the center of the gem almost looks see-through, like a window. You could put it over a page of text and you're going to be able to read the words right through the stone. Extinction is the opposite. It's when a gemstone is cut very deep and it's going to give the center of the stone a very, very dark appearance, sometimes almost black. The reason why we see this, and we see again a lot with different colors of sapphires, is because they're so rare and expensive and the price per carat is so high that gem cutters know that even if they cut a stone with a window or some extinction, the price per carat is still going to be high enough and the stone is still going to be beautiful enough that they're going to get enough bang for their buck. Obviously, with a synthetic gem, the price per carat is extremely low, and so they don't have to worry about saving weight. They don't have to worry about sacrificing anything in the appearance of the gemstone. They can cut whatever they want because the material cost is very low. I've talked about rubies, emeralds, and sapphires a lot, and that's because they are the most expensive colored gemstones, so they tend to obviously get imitated and synthesized the most. This is something to think about if you are seeing something that looks like a citrine, an amethyst, even a morganite. Likely it is natural because these stones are definitely lower value and there isn't a lot of investment value in synthesizing them and sometimes even imitating them. Obviously, in very, very low quality kind of costume jewelry, you might have some imitations with various colors, but overall, most gems you don't see a lot of lab stones with because it's just too expensive. Now, the last tip, but one of the biggest things I'm thinking about as a gemologist when I'm trying to spot fakes or even the overall quality of a piece of jewelry when I'm out and about, is the quality of the setting that the stones are set into. When we talk about mass market jewelry, we're seeing a lot of pieces that are made in 9 and 10 karat gold, for example. So when you're looking at the gemstones that are being used in this type of alloy, you're gonna get a lot of color treated gemstones, a lot of those irradiated gemstones. You're gonna get maybe even some glass filled rubies, some dyed gems, things that have been treated to give it a better appearance overall. And you can learn a lot more about these types of gems in our videos about gem treatments 1 and part 2. Along with those treated gemstones, you're also getting a lot of imitations, as I mentioned before, things like green chalcedony being used instead of emerald. You're also getting a lot of these new lab and synthetic diamonds and colored gems being used in lower grade jewelry that is gold vermeil, for example, or even gold plated over stainless steel jewelry. The most expensive metal alloys, including 18 karat and even platinum, they are being reserved in general for the most high quality natural gemstones. They could still have some heat treatment because that's extremely common, but nothing that is really going to really affect the chemical structure, let's say, of the gem. You also want to look at the other gemstones that are being placed with a stone that you are thinking about, whether it's synthetic or even imitation. And you see a ruby that looks beautiful, but it's been set with diamonds that are graded included I. Those diamonds are not good quality, they are very inexpensive, and so the likelihood of that ruby being natural or untreated, not glass filled, is much more likely. It is very unlikely to put a very high quality, expensive ruby with very poor quality diamonds. So again, if you see a gem and you're not sure whether it's fake or natural or synthetic, but the setting that is in is kind of thin and wiry, maybe it's 10 karat gold, maybe the prongs don't look very high quality. These are all things that are going to help you realize that the stone is likely not that expensive. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below and visit us on Instagram at Winston Gems and Jewelry.